Hello, welcome to Dementia Awareness Training for First Responders. My name is Robert Stellatello. I'm the owner of Right at Home, Hinsdale Oak Park, Chicago. We provide caregivers that allow seniors and disabled adults to remain in their homes in comfort and safety. Today we'll be talking about some information regarding dementia and ways that you can more effectively interact and communicate with dementia sufferers. First off, let's talk about dementia-friendly communities. The dementia-friendly movement started over in England in 2012. There was a gentleman who was suffering from early onset dementia. He's still in his 50s, had a very bad experience in a retail store and said, enough of that. There's more and more of us every day. We're not going away. People need to know how to communicate and interact appropriately with people who have dementia. And so he started a dementia-friendly movement. Came to the United States in 2015. Now it's in every state. There's a dementia-friendly Illinois. Within a state, you get designation as a dementia-friendly community, one town at a time. So what is dementia-friendly? It's awareness and then training for appropriate interaction and communication with dementia sufferers. Dementia-friendly communities are characterized by a better understanding of dementia. There's less fear, less avoidance, less stigma for people living with dementia. You have inclusion and support for people living with dementia and for their families and caregivers. There are concerted efforts to raise awareness about dementia, transform attitudes, and move people to action. And finally, this all results in improved quality of life for people living with dementia and their families and their care partners. Let's get some facts and figures just to give you an idea of the size of this essentially epidemic. More than 5 million people in America now are diagnosed with dementia-related disease, primarily Alzheimer's disease. Roughly 70% of dementia diagnoses are Alzheimer's. And this number is going to spiral and reach almost 14 million by 2050. About 70% of people living with dementia are in their homes, and dementia causes confusion. It leads people to act in ways that can put themselves or others in danger. And finally, and this is something that's very important for first responders to be aware of, approximately 60% of homes where a person living with dementia is, they have firearms in that home. Now, they may be loaded, they may be unloaded, but as you're all aware, even an unloaded gun can be dangerous. So people living with dementia, they may fear involving the police or the fire department because they are concerned about being removed from the home. That's their fear, is that they're going to be taken from their home to some situation that they don't know what it is. You very often will not get effective cooperation or communication from spouses or care partners. They may be hesitant to share information, either because they also fear separation or having their dementia sufferer removed from the home. Unfortunately, they also may be reluctant to give information because they're concealing undue influence or even abuse or neglect. And finally, people living with dementia may have a different understanding of what the uniform represents. That alone may cause fear for them. It could bring up unpleasant memories from their past, particularly if you're talking about people who are not native-born Americans, who come from a foreign country where the involvement of the police had a very different meaning than it does here. Well, here's some approaches and strategies that you can use to be more effective in communicating and working with dementia sufferers. First off, obviously, we always treat these people with dignity and respect. Their appearance may have changed, their behavior may have changed, but inside they are the person that they've always been. They have their hopes, they have their dreams, they have their memories. They have their dignity, and they deserve to be treated as such. It's important to avoid talking past someone who has dementia. If you're in a room with a dementia sufferer and their care partner, and communicate only with the care partner, it's like you're indicating that the person with dementia is not even there and that they don't have any kind of a say. You want to be patient, you want to be supportive. Because dementia sufferers process information differently from you and I, It can take a person living with dementia as much as 30 seconds to recognize, process, and respond to a question or a command. So be patient. More often than not, they will get there. You want to let the individual know that you are listening to them, that you're trying to understand what it is that they're communicating. We want to avoid correcting or criticizing these individuals. It can cause frustration for them, and very often that will morph into anger or acting out. If somebody is convinced that it's Tuesday when in fact it's Saturday, most often it really doesn't make any difference. So you can go along with that. You want to make sure that they know that you're there to provide comfort and reassurance. And if you are having difficulty communicating with them, encourage them to continue and make the effort to try and discern what it is that they're trying to communicate with you, the point that they're trying to get across. As first responders, there are a number of challenges that you face in emergency situations. You've got an illness, you've got an injury, there's a fire, a flood, some other natural disaster. This is going to affect persons living with dementia differently than it will a member of the general public. People with dementia are lost. They can be confused very often. And when I say lost, I don't just necessarily mean that they can't find their way to a place. They're lost inside. And we want to keep that in mind when you're trying to communicate with them. They'll do things like forgetting to pay for an item in a store or pay for a meal if they've gone to a restaurant. Most often this is not deliberate. They just don't realize that they haven't paid, or they may even think that they have paid. In emergency situations, a person living with dementia can be anxious, afraid, agitated, and these will turn into aggression, particularly towards unfamiliar people or something that they feel threatened by. Often they'll be accompanied by a care partner, a caregiver, and when you're interacting with that, you want to see if there are signs that this individual is taking advantage of the person living with dementia, if there's undue influence, abuse, or neglect. Here's some general strategies. We use the acronym TALK. So TALK, the T is take it slowly. As we said before, people living with dementia process information differently than you or I do. So you want to give them the opportunity to get the answer out. You want to ask simple questions. Part of the changes that dementia causes to the brain are on the hippocampus, which is the logic, information processing, reasoning, executive function, decision-making side. Offering multiple options or a string of commands is overwhelming for a person living with dementia. You want to ask simple questions and make simple instructions for what it is that you want them to do or need them to do in order to keep them safe. We want to limit reality checks. We talked about that just a few minutes ago. There's no need to correct somebody if they have the day wrong or if they think they're in a place where they're not. Important to keep eye contact. That's how you will maintain the connection so that you'll more easily be able to gather their meaning and they will be able to gather yours as well. So here's some general strategies. These can prove helpful. As we said before, you want to provide one-on-one instructions using simple language. If you're in an area where there's noise and confusion and a lot of activity, it's very helpful to get the dementia sufferer into a one-on-one situation in a quieter area. One of the things that happens with dementia is that you lose the ability to filter and differentiate between relevant and irrelevant sounds. So if there's a lot of things going on that are distracting, it's much less likely that dementia sufferer will be able to focus on you and on the questions you're asking or the requests that you're making to keep them safe. If somebody is starting to get more and more anxious and they're spiraling up, we want to try and redirect them or distract them to get them off of that track and back to a more calm state so that you can have them do the things that you need them to do to keep safe. Obviously, and this is something that you certainly well know, you never want to leave a person living with dementia alone in a stressful situation or really at any time. Being under those kind of conditions can cause them to wander, to become more confused, putting them at greater risk for injury. So in an emergency situation, People living with dementia, as we said, may not be able to process information the way we do. This makes them more vulnerable. They may not even recognize it as a dangerous situation. They have limited ability to understand directions. Even if you give them to them, it's very possible they'll forget them almost immediately. They can be easily agitated, frustrated, overwhelmed. Most of these emotions will morph into fear, which then causes aggression. Additionally, in a disaster or a stress situation, it increases their potential to wander or to hide in fear to protect themselves. So here's some specific concerns that we need to be aware of. This is something that you do, I would assume, anytime you go into a home. You want to determine if there are weapons, if there are guns in the house. If there are, you want to see that they are removed, that they're locked up, and that the key is separate from the safe. If you are in a situation where you see someone wandering, they're disoriented, they're confused in a public place, signs can be inappropriate attire. They may be in short sleeves and no shoes in the middle of December when it's snowing. You can recognize a shuffling and unbalanced gait, awkwardness when they're walking. They may have an unawareness of danger that they may be in, not recognizing that it's unsafe to cross a busy street, for example. And typically, they're going to be somebody who is over the age of 65. There is a percentage of dementia sufferers who have early onset that can be in their 40s or 50s, but primarily the numbers are much higher the older that you get. If you are in a situation where you make a traffic stop and the individual appears disoriented, confused, is not able to respond appropriately to commands or provide the information like driver's license and registration, things like that. If you need to issue a citation, by all means do so. If your judgment is that they're unsafe to drive, don't let them drive home, clearly. Many jurisdictions track these sorts of incidents through DMV reports, and they'll be able to pull up information that will indicate if this is a recurring situation, which is an indication of danger to themselves and to other people. So here's some strategies and disaster response. When you're interacting with the person living with dementia, you want to avoid physical force if possible. They just won't understand what's happening. Yet you do need to remove them from that dangerous situation. So there is a balance there that you need to make. You want to try and be creative. This is where redirecting or distracting can come in to diffuse a potentially volatile situation. If you're in a situation where you expect abuse and neglect, if that individual is injured, obviously you arrange transport to hospitals. If they're not injured but you perceive them to be unsafe, they need to be relocated to a safe situation. And if they are safe, you want to refer them to sources for assistance if they have needs, either physical or mental or financial, that one of the local agencies that you have lists of, I'm sure, in the office can provide. And finally, if you do suspect that there is abuse or neglect, or you see somebody who's in an unsafe situation, you can always contact Adult Protective Services and get them involved to make an assessment with a caseworker. You run into a situation where you're contacted by an owner of a shop or a restaurant because someone has left without paying, and you recognize that this is a situation that potentially was caused by dementia. I'm sure everyone would prefer if you can resolve that with the store manager rather than filing a report and potentially arresting this individual for something they didn't even know they were doing. If there is a caregiver that's available, you want to encourage them to accompany this person whenever they go in public. So, as part of a dementia-friendly community effort, we're really looking to be proactive. We want to coordinate between state and local emergency management offices and then the Aging Services Network. Develop special needs registries that will identify people who have dementia and could need additional help in the event of a disaster there. We want to have contact information for them and for a care partner or a relative or a neighbor who's able to be of assistance. We're providing specialized education on disaster preparedness for people with dementia. Their families and their care partners is very helpful if they're prepared in advance and know what to do in a situation like that. We want to include people living with dementia and their care partners in developing local emergency plans and all ages and abilities into disaster planning and response recovery. That's part of what the dementia-friendly community does. That's part of what Dementia Friendly America encourages. That's a coalition of all sectors of the community working to put together a plan that protects and improves the quality of life for people living with dementia. We want to plan for people with dementia. They're increasingly vulnerable, and very often they will need additional support during a disaster or emergency situation. There are some identification programs. There's a national one. It's called Medical Alert and the Alzheimer's Association Safe Return Program. Some states have programs called Silver Search. It's similar to the Amber Alert program that you'll see on the signs on roads, but it's specifically geared towards seniors or people who may be disoriented or confused and have wandered off. There are also area-specific programs. For example, in Oak Park, where we are, we have an emergency program called the Green Bracelet. It's a silicone bracelet that you see all the time, but it has a plate on there with some contact information. And it's registered at the station. So if someone is found wandering or it doesn't know who they are or where they are, you have the ability to contact a responsible party. If you have an interest in getting more information about any of the topics that we've talked about today, there are a number of references available. They're provided here on the screen. These are live links that you can access that information. We appreciate your time in watching this video about first responder dementia awareness. After this screen comes, there is a quiz that you can take to receive a certificate indicating that you have received dementia awareness training. Thank you for your time. We appreciate the attention. I'm Robert Stellatello, and have a good day.